It is my utmost pleasure, and I'm really happy to welcome today two guests, Alice Waterston and Charlotte Gordon, to our discussion meeting, Anthropological Encounter, with the book Light in Dark Times, and with the two co-authors. So I will introduce the authors of the book shortly, and then we'll go. I will give them the floor to present the book. So the book that we're talking about today, Light in Dark Times. I don't know if you had a chance to have it in your own hands, but hopefully maybe you had a chance to look. Oh, I see some people have even a hard copy. That's really great. Some of us had some electronic copy, and also we could have a look online, and or maybe read Alice's article, last article from last year, which also discusses the issues of the book. And for those who have been in Poznan at the International Congress, US, or however you say that, the great Congress that was organized by Michał Buchowski, Natalia Bloch, and others in Poznan. The book, actually, the idea of the book was also presented in the keynote given by Alice. So the seeds have been there, and now we're getting the plants and seeing how they grow. So the book is in a way, maybe experiment or a venture into both written and graphic form. So it combines anthropology and art, and that's why it also has two authors and two anthropologists, two very great prolific writers and creators and artists. And one is Charlotte Gordon, who is an artist, anthropologist, and an illustrator based in the UK. However, she studied both in New York at the Art Students League and in London at Fine Art Studios. And also she has a master's degree in anthropology from UCL, University College London. Her work appears in the Anthropological Forum, for example, in the Anthropology News, the member magazine of the American Anthropological Association. And so she ventures in between art and anthropology, and so we're very happy to have you here, Charlotte, from London. And the second author, who's responsible more for the writing of the book, than illustrating, is Alice Waterston, who is a presidential scholar and professor at City University of New York, John Jay College of Criminal Justice. And she is also now a fellow of the Swedish Collegium for Advanced Studies, which means that she will be in Europe next spring, which she mentioned before. So hopefully in Poland as well for a short visit. She has been the president of the American Anthropological Association in the years 2015-17, and has been also very active in both editorship and editing writing. And she is the author of, I think, 7 or 8 books, and or co-author, co-editor of 7 books, and also an editor of a book series, Intimate Ethnography. And from the themes that Alice works on, she works on the consequences of structural violence, mobility, and also inequality, and how this actually plays out in individual lives. So you can see this from her early work on street addicts and homeless women in New York. And then also in her more recent work, the last book that was before the one we're talking about, My Father's Wars, Migration, Memory, and the Violence of a Century, which is a history of her father coming from Jedwabne in Poland, who has escaped war in Poland, but also escaped revolution in Cuba and has had a very interesting and prolific life, which shows actually what has happened to people in the 20th century. So from this also comes Alice's notion of intimate ethnography, which also I think has shaped what she is presenting to us now today. So I could speak more about Charlotte and Alice and their works, but they will speak for themselves and they will talk about their own cooperation and how this book that we're talking about came about, how this cooperation worked. And also I hope that we will have a space for discussing the important themes of our today, which is hope, engagement, and also a space for anthropology in what we're living through today. So with this, I give the voice to Alice and Charlotte. I'm very happy to welcome you, and the floor is yours. Thank you.
Unmute. Am I okay? Can you hear me?
Yes.
So thank you so much for that beautiful introduction, Helena. And I also want to thank Anya for getting in touch with me and inviting Charlotte and me to present today. We're thrilled to be here, and I'm so happy to see so many friends and also people who I hope will become new friends as we move away from living in our own spaces to being able to travel once again. And for me, I'm hoping that will be next year, as Helena said. So with that, I will get started. And as you can see, the title of our presentation, and I will present first and then Charlotte will, is Creating Light in Dark Times, Art and Anthropology in Graphic Form. Okay, I'm trying to go to the next slide. There we go. Last November, a journalist in an interview about my work in anthropology, including the graphic novel Light in Dark Times, posed to me this question. I wonder, she asked, how do we know that we live in dark times? How do we recognize the darkness? We don't need to look very far to see that we live in dark times, I responded, and I rattled off some statistics updated from that time to the current moment. Worldwide, an estimated 821 million people go to bed hungry and undernourished each day, according to the World Health Organization. There are 80 million forcibly displaced people, a number that keeps growing. This figure is 10 million more than we document in Light and Dark Times, according to the UN Refugee Agency. An estimated 4 million people have been killed during US wars in Afghanistan, Iraq, Syria, Pakistan, and Yemen since 9/11, according to war scholar and anthropologist David Vine, at a financial cost to US taxpayers of $6.4 trillion. And then there's the pandemic. As of April 26th, 3,111,000 people worldwide have died from the coronavirus, and over 147 million are infected. In the United States, over 572,000 people are dead from COVID, and there are over 32 million cases in the US, according to the Johns Hopkins Coronavirus Resource Center. These are the numbers. And then there are the contexts of devastating economic collapses, ever-expanding militarism and worship of weapons, racism and nationalist fervor, environmental crisis and irreversible climate damage, rampant power abuses, and everyday structural violence. Social, political, and economic inequities are expanding. People are suffering stupid deaths, to borrow anthropologist Paul Farmer's expression, while private, concentrated wealth continues to expand under global neoliberal capitalism, a system that maintains conditions of scarcity and insecurity through a politics of fear and fragmentation, draconian policies, and practices that too often do more harm than good. The dark times we reference in the book's title reflects grim circumstances, those in the immediate situation and those that have been pervasive for far too long. On the eve of World War II, the dramatist and poet Bertolt Brecht wrote to posterity, "Truly, I live in dark times. He who laughs has not yet received the terrible news." There is no question, in my view, that we too live in dark times. Unless people have their blinders on, it is there. Some may not want to confront it, but it is there nevertheless. As a person on this earth for 7 decades and immersed in anthropology for well over half my life, I recognize the urgency to demonstrate the relevance of knowledge to real world concerns and to speak truth to power, necessary if insufficient actions on behalf of a livable future that has yet to come. In anthropology, for decades, there have been a series of interconnected debates about the discipline's disengagement from the public sphere that marked post-World War II anthropology, at least in the US. In academic circles, these debates have been centered on the politics of representation, writing culture, calls to decolonize the discipline, and how to put knowledge to use in the interest of a more just, ethical world. Anthropologist Didier Fosson's relatively recent 2008 plea for a moral anthropology reflects an intensification of the dilemmas anthropologists confront in the face of the world as it exists, marked by expanding globalization, militarization, inequalities, ecological disasters, and human suffering. Fosson's is not a new call, but a reminder that the question of the scholar's own values, assumptions, prejudices, and judgments needs to be made explicit, at least in the mind of the scholar, considering that, and I quote Fosson, telling right from wrong and the necessity of acting in favor of the good and against the evil, closed quote, shapes the who, what, where, how, and why of any anthropological endeavor. Perhaps this is also true for other disciplines. In my view, and considering the state of the world, there is no turning back from an explicitly engaged anthropology. We are left with its perils and promises, to use anthropologist Kay Warren's words, which means it may expand or limit knowledge, may facilitate analysis or inhibit it, may uncover or occlude information, and may advance or hinder understanding. Amid the moral longing in anthropology to do good, there is also no way to avoid critical reflexivity, no turning away from reflecting on the limitations, possibilities, and contradictions of the engaged observer. Feminist anthropologists and those looking to decolonize the discipline have long issued the call for critical reflexivity, recognizing that anthropologists are always, and I quote, at risk of participating in ideologies blind to their own, a caution Fran Massialis and colleagues offered the discipline over 3 decades ago. The point is that all modes of thought have social origins, the specifics of which must be brought out of the shadows. This implores anthropologists and scholars in any discipline to be consistently mindful of their own centrisms and privileges. Likewise, Fassan posits that, and I quote again, the more we are conscious and critical of our own moral presuppositions or certainties, instead of keeping them in the black box of self-contentment, the more we are capable of respecting the epistemological grounds and of preserving the political engagements of our scientific work, close quote. These considerations figure in why Charlotte and I developed this nonfiction graphic novel. Light in Dark Times is published in the game-changing book series Ethnographic of the University of Toronto Press. The book is the result of an extraordinary collaboration between Charlotte and me, she the artist and I the anthropologist-writer. Our collaboration was an exceptional experience that comprised place, space, dialogue, words, writing, sketching, and illustrating. The purpose was to produce a work that cuts through mass confusion resulting from purposeful political obfuscation to identify precisely and accessibly issues of global significance, and to deliver this knowledge and these insights in a creative way, allowing us to potentially reach readers and viewers beyond the narrow confines of the ivory tower. However, our first encounter took place deep into the secluded world of academe. Charlotte and I had not met before when I stepped onto a ballroom stage in early December of 2017 to close out my term as president of the American Anthropological Association. In the presidential address, I reflected on that moment of being in the world and in anthropology. No doubt these are dark times, I declared. Little did I know how bad it would get. I asked of myself and of the audience, what of us in these times? How will we pass the time that is given us on earth? In dialogue with Hannah Arendt and Bertolt Brecht, I then explored some meanings and implications of being introspective, of thinking in dark times, of truth, lies, and the danger of the trivial, and of envisioning and acting to create an alternative world from that within we now dwell. The next morning, I received a beautiful gift from Charlotte. She had drawn a most spectacular rendition of the talk, capturing the spirit and the details of my words, the light as golden and the darkness in all its fury and dangerousness, the specks of red, the cotton wool that obscures, the rich store of world knowledge in a rushing movement outwards. By January of the new year, Charlotte and I began the collaboration, meeting weekly by Skype and then later in person when Charlotte came from the UK to live with me in New York for months-long periods over the course of 2018. We analyzed other graphic books to assess their infrastructures and their elements. How many pages altogether? How many images on a page? How long each chapter? What shape the narrative arc? How are characters presented? We each deconstructed my written document, pulling out what seemed the key points of each line, paragraph, and section. We came together to compare notes, discuss, and take the project to the next level. Slowly, we transformed a speech directed to an audience of anthropologists into a graphic book designed for students of the world looking to understand the darkness and what they and we might do to transform it. Eventually, the story we developed unfolded as encounters with writers, philosophers, activists, and anthropologists of the past and of the present, some recognizable, others unfamous. Virginia Woolf and Vivian Gornick, Hannah Arendt and Bertolt Brecht, Sherry Ortner, Roger Berkowitz, Peg Birmingham, Roger Lancaster, Eben Kirksey, Carolyn Nordstrom, Paul Farmer, Brian Stevenson, and Eduardo Galeano. Some people say that light in dark times is prescient. I say, as others have also, that the troubles of our world have been long in place, now broken wide open. Among many others, anthropologist Carolyn Nordstrom in 2009 saw disaster coming in her concept of global fractures, which captures the fragility and unsustainability of the world where no one is invulnerable to the quakes along the lines. Light in Dark Times invites readers and viewers to explore those political catastrophes and moral disasters that bring outrage and sometimes despair, and that beg to be identified, studied, revealed, understood, confronted, and resisted. The book is a lament over the darkness of the times, an urgent plea to go to the dark place and confront it. It is an affirmation of the value of knowledge that comes from anthropology, as well as from the arts, humanities, and philosophy. It is responsive to the call that anthropologists engage in practice and the public sphere and take advantage of multimodal formats to amplify narrative voices in the dissemination of knowledge, to make such knowledge accessible, and to facilitate interaction with increasingly diverse target audiences. The project, our collaboration, and the published book are unique in bringing together serious scholarship and contemporary aesthetics, elevating the graphic genre by presenting complex philosophical and political themes in a mixed media format. Light in Dark Times is designed as an exquisite work of art that I find beautiful to look at and to hold. It entered the world just 6 months ago. Based on responses we have received in that short time, this little book of art and anthropology seems to inspire viewers and readers, facilitating in them a way to see, perceive, and understand the critical issues we humans face, and what we might do about them. This is a most intense period for the world, considering the material, environmental, and political conditions of life in these times. I believe that Light in Dark Times offers a reflection of what the world is and has been. At the same time, it offers a way of learning about the world. It reflects my moral commitments and ethical positions, in which human needs are prioritized over rapacious interests. These commitments are not hidden in Façon's black box, but are made explicit. They are revealed in the choices I have made about who to profile, what scholarship to emphasize, what questions to ask, what modes of communication to use, and what challenges to propose across the trajectory of the unfolding narrative in this work. And now, let us get Charlotte's perspective on the project, our remarkable collaboration and the making of Light in Dark Times. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Elise. That was brilliant. I I love it. I love hearing our story, the way you speak about it. I will just begin sharing my screen now and bring up the presentation. So I am Charlotte Corden. I am in the UK, and I am the illustrator for Light in Dark Times. And I'm going to share with you quite a few images as I talk about the making of it, what it was like, how we did it, and the ideas behind some of it. I want to share as many images as possible because I know there's probably quite a few of you here who haven't got the book or maybe haven't seen it or seen pictures of it. So hopefully you can get a sense of what's inside. But also I'm sorry if I go quite fast because we don't have a lot of time. So it's just going to be quite a series of images, but we're all used to scrolling by now. So I think it'll be fun. So yeah, I'm going to jump in the story from where Elise left off, of her speaking at this audience of 1,000 anthropologists in Washington, D.C. in December 2017. And at the time, I had studied anthropology, and I was using drawing as a way to figure out complex ideas. So quite often during my lectures in previous years, or actually even in my working life, I would use drawing as a way to figure out what was being said. And that night that Elise spoke about, I was in the audience and I was there with my iPad ready to draw. And I became absolutely transported by her words. And this image sums it up for me. It was as if I just entered into this world of knowledge that I hadn't any idea that was there. And I was transported. It was the honest human experience of our world that she described. And she spoke about ideas that I immediately wanted to know more about, like darkness hidden in plain sight. This is a picture from the book about all of the things that were wrong with the world and the observations that Elise was making about that. The obfuscation of trivia. Here, the cotton wool of purposeful political obfuscation and pointless trivia that make it almost impossible for people to see what is going on. This is describing those bits and pieces of life that make it hard for us to see the truth of what is in front of us. She talked about the will to resist. She spoke about the hopelessness that we feel in our own insignificant abilities. She highlighted, as she said before, the importance of lament and offered the words to say when conflicted by the inequalities of our blatant privileges that become so obvious when held up against the suffering of so many in these times. And amidst all the darkness, she spoke of this powerful hope we have in our collective ability to work towards a process of mutual understanding on a gigantic scale. So in the years leading up to this, while studying anthropology, I had begun to use drawing, like I said, as a means to unravel complex, sometimes philosophical ideas. And for me, drawing had become this essential tool for thinking. And I began to believe that it could not just be used as a means to describe, but also as a means to see anew, to discover. And so when Elise gave her speech, in the moment, I took down as many notes as I possibly could. I was just writing as fast as I could instead of drawing. And then I spent the next hours working on this illustration I wanted to get what were the key points. How did the darkness relate to the light? What was this cotton wool, and what were the things that were also related to the cotton wool that she spoke about? You know, what was this big, rich store of anthropological knowledge that she spoke about, and this envisioning of an alternative world? And how could I get all of those ideas, these wonderful concepts, onto one page? That was my aim. And yeah, as she describes that evening, I couldn't help but draw out this speech in the sketchnote form. And I wanted to find that visual thread that knit her words together. So I created this and I emailed it out to a few people who I knew in the American Anthropological Association, and Elise received it the next day from one of them. And she obviously got in touch straight away and said, "Wow, this is amazing. This is so great." And I was very flattered that she got in touch. And then a month later, she then got in touch again and said, "Would you like to do a book with me?" And of course, I said immediately, yes, this was my ideal project. This is like the dream. I could go deep into her meaning. I could go deep into the words that she, every single word or phrase that was important, I could actually get into there and figure it out visually. And then I could have, for me, this was a way of this was a huge gift, because it was a huge gift of knowledge, really, that she was offering, as well as doing a book together. So months later, we had begun in the basement of Elise's house in New York. And I was on that same journey of every time she read out a sentence, I wanted to see what she said. And it didn't matter that I didn't get it down in visual form at the time. I just scribbled a rough note on this working wall that we had here. We laid out these sheets of paper, and in the end, the sheets of paper, they wrapped all the way around the room. They were all along the bars of each thing. Like you can see up here, they were along here and all along here. And we were surrounded by a project as we made it. And this is actually a video of us in the basement working that summer. Time-lapse video, and you can sort of see what our process was. Elise would read out something and explain to me the deep meaning of what she meant, and I would go up to the wall and I would scribble it out and think, really, is that it? And then we'd go up and discuss it, and we think, well, is that the right place for that in this chapter? Or, how are we going to rework the introduction? Or what do you mean by trivia? What does Hannah Arendt mean by radical evil? And we continued like this. Let's turn it out of the way. Yeah, it was important for me that the images I created were a true reflection of the meaning behind her words and the words of everyone else in the book. For example, I'd originally sketched radical evil, Hannah Arendt, who is a character in the book. You may not know her, she's a political thinker, philosopher. And she had this concept of what radical evil was. And initially, you can see here, you might have spotted this in Elise's presentation, she had an image of it up there as well. I created a kind of cartoon character for it in my head. I was like, that's what it's going to be. It's going to be this horrid, radical evil. And actually, when it came to the second draft, I realized that the seriousness and reality of radical evil and Hannah Arendt's writings about radical evil had to be honored. It had to be a more accurate portrayal of what she really meant. And so the illustration became this disturbing picture of humans being made less than human. And it took a while to get here. I had to really get Elise to explain over and over again what Hannah Arendt meant. Why does she mean it like that? What was the actual kind of underneath the research behind it? Like everything that Elise knew about Hannah Arendt, I was trying to get out of her so I could create this image. So an example of a time when actually it was very much easier. Well, actually it wasn't that much. This time in the basement when I was walking around and around and around trying to figure out what on earth to draw for this particular drawing. And I realized that actually what I was doing was what I should be drawing. And I was looking at my footprints walking around in a circle. And I realized that that's exactly the drawing I should make, because I was trying to come to some illumination. I was trying to come to some understanding of how on earth to draw what it was like to come to an understanding, to come to illumination. And the whole process at that point seemed completely circular and perfect. So you can't quite see at the top here, I'm sorry that it's cropped out. This says, Anthropology taught me that looking is not necessarily seeing, and that seeing is not necessarily perceiving, and that perceiving as understanding, as illumination, is a central goal of anthropology, even if we fall short in reaching it. Sometimes it's hard to describe exactly what this book is about because there is no other like it. It is a fusion of Elise's inspirational anthropological insight and wisdom, the writings and commentary of other significant historical and current characters, and my own attempt at comprehending and uniting their academic theory into a visually engaging and cohesive whole. We use illustration to break the boundary between academic writing and the graphic genre in order to open up this discussion and engagement with what are some of the most profound and important questions that we must ask ourselves in our lifetime. What does it mean to be human? At every stage, it was Elise's writing that inspired the drawing, and it is no exaggeration to say that Elise's words have changed my life. She has taught me how to think with a new perspective. Through investigating how to draw prejudice, I had to sometimes face my own prejudices. Often when I see events taking place on the news, in my mind, I will turn to the relevant page of Light and Dark Times, lamenting that even anger against injustice makes the voice grow harsh. Thinking that to make a difference, I must get proximate to human suffering. And when I see swathes of people acting in ways I can barely comprehend, I think back to Elise's words. They are afraid of annihilation and desire protection. And I know I must turn to myself and ask myself the central question: how do I want to be human? The illustrations that make up Light and Dark Times grapple with some of the most profound and difficult issues facing our world today. Through drawing them, we have tried to make sense of the calamities that dominate our society and offer a stream of light to those who dare to dream of a better future. Our hope is that these issues and ideas, visualized as they are, might help others to see anew and inspire fresh possibilities in a world where seeing the truth has become increasingly difficult, but where coming together with mutual understanding is still well within our reach. Thank you, and if you want to follow us, our Instagram handle is @lightindarktimesbook. It's been a real pleasure to speak with you today. Okay, so I'll stop the share and hand back to Helena.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much, Alice and Charlotte, for this beautiful presentation. And I think it's only proper that we move to a conversation among all of us. And I think both these thoughts and these illustrations might have spurred different ideas and feelings, and we're also all going through different dark times, from the personal to the global. So I think there is space here to kind of share and also see how we can act as anthropologists. So first, if anyone has any immediate reactions, there's space and you can share your thoughts or reflections. And in the meantime, maybe I'll ask Alice and Charlotte also to reflect on. I was wondering, how would you see hope in how would you see hope, and how do you think of hope in anthropological terms? And if you think of the different meanings that people actually give to hope, we're looking at our work as anthropologists, that it can give hope to the world, but seeing all of these dark realities, inequalities, And that it's often very difficult to actually really instill hope in ourselves. And then how do we even move to instilling hope in others? So I think that would be something which I was thinking through when I was reading the book and looking through the images.
So I can get started with that. Firstly, I want to say that we have a very short preface in this book. It's a page and a half. And it begins by quoting Václav Havel on his definition of hope, which I'm going to read to you. Hope is definitely not the same thing as optimism. It is not the conviction that something will turn out well, but the certainty that something makes sense, regardless of how it turns out. Hope can give us the strength to live and continually try new things, even in conditions that seem as hopeless as ours do here and now. And that was written in 1987, I believe. So I think that is very relevant to your question, but also to our work as anthropologists, because I think that part of what if I may speak for all of us anthropologists for a moment, I'll speak for myself, but also as I have come to understand my discipline and the colleagues who I know, is that we are striving to make sense of the world and understand it. And that rich store of anthropological knowledge that Charlotte drew and that I had spoken about is just imagine the enormous value in the enormous quantity of knowledge that anthropologists collectively over time and everywhere in the world have produced. This is a remarkable thing. And regardless of the flaws, the mistakes, the failure to see one's own social positionality, its role in being a handmaiden of colonialism, regardless of those terrible aspects of our discipline, there's still this beautiful body of knowledge that I think, for the most part, it is being produced, has been and continues to be produced in hopes of mutual understanding on a grand scale, in producing knowledge and understanding and appreciation for human diversity. Again, even if we don't arrive at that. So I think for anthropologists, there is, we can all get very discouraged. And Charlotte showed one of her images and my words about, our discipline is very marginal. It's true. Compared to other disciplines, compared to sociology, compared to English literature, compared to, these days, the STEM disciplines. And we're also, so we're very small, we're very marginal in many ways, and we struggle to survive, as you in Poland know very well, full well, the struggle to survive as a discipline. And yet we can't lapse into despair over that marginality, because that position of marginality, because what we do produce, I think, is so important. And we don't have all the answers, but we represent an approach and a perspective that if the world loses that, that's a real loss. So I think that should give individual anthropologists hope that what they're doing is important. It is. And if it weren't so important, by the way, one of the things that I think is very true about our discipline is that I think it can be very threatening to the status quo. And that may be one of the reasons it's marginalized and so marginal. If we weren't so threatening, because so much of anthropology does demonstrate the value of human beings and human cultural diversity, that can be very threatening to the status quo. Okay, so I think that's one place of hope. And I think the other place of hope has to do with that will to change the world. So one of the things we talk about in the book, and quoting Eduardo Galeano, is we ask readers and viewers to dare to dream, to imagine an alternative world, to take the time and the space to think about and imagine, if you could change the world, what would it look like? How often do we do that? Do we take the time in our busy days with all the millions of emails, with all the papers to grade, with all of the things that we have to do every single day? Do we take the time to say, what would that world look like? And if we do that, if we take the time, that's a first step, I think, in the transformation, in transforming the world so that it is a livable place, a sustainable place for human beings and other living creatures, if you will. What we don't do in this book is prescribe exactly how the world should look, but we invite people to, again, quoting Galeano, dare to dream. I'll say one last thing and then I'll stop. And that is that I do very much believe that so many of us are already doing things that includes our anthropological research and writing, but we're also doing other things in our communities and with our students and, in places where we live, to help change the world for the better. And I think that we don't give ourselves enough credit for those things that we do. And I myself, have only recently been reflecting on my, what I have tended to call either activism or volunteer activities in my own community, and have come to recognize more recently that this is part of the hope, that those are not just minor actions and activities. Those are core activities. I'll stop there.
Thank you very much. It's actually very much to the point. And I will give in a second Natalia the voice. I just wanted to say that actually your thoughts also make us think of our engagement and how we engage, and actually the different ways in which we can engage. And what also I read often now, where I see in us anthropologists and anthropology students, there's also a fear of engaging the world as it is difficult to be engaged, and it has different consequences. Actually, engagement carries consequences of going into relationships, hearing difficult stories. So I also sense a fear of engagement. However, I think it's crucial. But I will leave that for later, and I give Natalia the voice.
Actually, yes, before we move to Natalia, I mean, maybe Charlotte has something to say also about that. I mean, I don't want to speak for Charlotte, but when we were working together and going to those dark places, it was hard. And so, I've been studying, these kinds of issues for decades, but, Charlotte is a lot younger than I am. And, it was hard to go to those dark places. And there were many times that we had to stop and Charlotte had to go for a run, or Charlotte's here. I don't want to speak for her or as if she's not in the room. So I'll stop there. And I don't know if you want to say anything about that, Charlotte, before we move on to Natalia.
Well, you summarized up the hope very well. I love that quote that you started with from Václav Havel. I think it's just so perfect for our book and also just utterly true. I'll just say it one more time because it's worth saying twice. Some things are. Hope is definitely not the same thing as optimism. It is not the conviction that something will turn out well, but the certainty that something makes sense, regardless of how it turns out. Hope can give us the strength to live and continually try new things, even in conditions that seem as hopeless as ours do here and now. And, you know, our conditions here and now are not hopeless. They don't seem hopeless. I mean, sometimes maybe that's what we're talking about, you know, in the face of all the, all of the fear that might come from what we might do. And that can sometimes feel hopelessness, but you know, hope is the conviction that it's not the conviction that something will turn out well. It's the certainty that something makes sense. And that's what we're trying to do with Light in the Dark Times. We're trying to make sense of the darkness, of the political obfuscation, of the trivia, of lies that seem to be able to be repackaged as truth, and all of these things that we deal with in our world today. So yeah, it helps. Did Natalia have a question?
Actually, I do not have a question, but I just want to contribute to this discussion on the meanings of hope, because I'm trying to build my own academia of hope in my research recently. And what I find inspiring is moving away from the ethics of probability towards the ethics of possibility, and practicing something which Arjun Appadurai calls the anthropologies of aspiration and possibility, because he claims basically that all people have the capacity of to aspire, and by exploring, researching this capacity, and by making it visible, we actually make it stronger. So this is my way towards the hope in academia these days. Just brief comment.
Thank you, Natalia. Actually, that's very much also to the point with seeing the possibilities, rather like seeing that also expanding them and showing them and exposing them rather than diminishing. Alice,
yeah, and that was actually Appadurai's response to Sherry Ortner's article about dark anthropology, his way of moving beyond dark anthropology. So instead of focusing on probabilities, which is the constraints, we should move toward the possibilities.
So I think that's such an interesting point, and I think we're all in the same conversation, maybe saying things slightly differently with different words, but similar things, because of course, actually, we encounter Sherry Ortner in this book early on in Dark Anthropology. You know, I think that you're about the aspiration possibilities and making it visible. It's that the invisibility is also a political project, because just as I was acknowledging my own contributions in my own community, for example, that I'm just one person, but there are so many people, not just anthropologists, but people in the world who are doing amazing things. And that's not made visible in, you know, so people don't know. I think it's becoming more visible now, at least in some circles. And as there is, for example, in our field, you know, a more acceptability, it's more acceptable to be engaged anthropologists, public anthropologists, and collaborate with local communities and make that explicit. And those who are in the academy are getting credit for that more and more, which is really important too. So we're moving out of silos, at least in the US. I mean, my perspective is a US perspective. So I can, you know, in terms of how the academy is working or doesn't work. But I think it's a political project to make invisible the ways in which people come together in community and in activism, and they do make social change. It might be micro, it might be community level based, or you know, you know, in some you know, policies and practices that get shifted and that get moved. And it might not get attention but I think those things needed to be attended to, because they are the result of people's collective agency. That does not, but at the same time, we have to understand we still need the dark anthropology in the sense of we need to go to the darkness to know why there's a reason to do this and not have our blinders on and pretend everything is, fine, too. So it is both. We have to be there. We have to do, it's a big project, but it's actually cutting through a lot of the nonsense to do it, to being focused on what's important. At least that's my view of it. So I love that you said that, Natalia, and I love that you're working in that area.
And what would you say, Alice, to those who actually fear going to these dark places and fear going, into engaging and building relations? And it's especially now in the time of pandemic, there is also among colleagues or students, there's a fear of fieldwork because it actually becomes dangerous to both sides. But there's also a kind of sometimes some, a danger of moving out totally and being very far from what is happening there. It's similar in situations of which you have been exploring, which is the homelessness and addiction and war or abuse or violence. So what would you say, how would you encourage people also not to be afraid and to also of the engagement and of the responsibility which comes with it?
Okay, so I mean, you said a lot of things there because firstly, of course, in this current pandemic situation, it is difficult for people to get proximate, and to be out in the field. And hopefully that's not a long-term problem, but is a short-term problem as the vaccine gets, disseminated more. The vaccines get disseminated more widely. I think there are ways to connect with people, even if you cannot do traditional field work, classic field work, but there are, and especially the younger people really, have such a facility with communicating on social media and in other ways. I think, again, I think that there's always an opportunity, even in a constraint, like this in the pandemic. Where are those spaces of opportunity, and where are the networks of people? So, but then when people are afraid to go into the, afraid, but I would have to find out who are you talking about? And what are they afraid of? So if you're talking about on the level of the individual person, then, it could be very different reasons why there's fear. I think that, depending on where you live, there is the fear of the, the political, because, you may be living in a circumstance where if you're engaged too much, you can be arrested, or, depending on what the circumstances are. But if the fear is a psychological or emotional, well, then I think that, it's hard to address that. I know that a lot of people, our students in my university, for example, are suffering and struggling so much. I work at a public university in the middle of New York City. And I'm also chair of my department, and we have we serve our university widely with a lot of courses, and so we have about 10 full-time faculty, but there are about 40 part-time faculty, so that's like 50 faculty. And imagine each faculty is teaching several courses, so we serve the college in a huge way. And we have a lot of students, and they're suffering. And I've been advising all of my faculty during this pandemic period to really look at their curriculum, look at their syllabi, and say, what's important and what's not? So does everybody, so our students, very few of whom, undergraduate students, very few of whom will go on to become PhDs in anthropology. So what is important for them? Is it important for them to know who Radcliffe Brown or Malinowski are? Or is it important for them to understand what is going on? Why is the pandemic in the US in New York, where they live, in New York City, affecting their lives so tremendously? What are the structural issues? What are the cultural issues? What are the social issues? What are the institutionalized issues? That, so it's again, this kind of goes back to autoethnography or intimate ethnography. Let's do that with our students. What is going on in your life, and how do we, as instructors, show them, help make sense of it? And then what literature can they read that provides that understanding, which is also a way for them to move towards hope. So just yesterday, a faculty member wrote me, desperate, shared with me a story from one of her students that was completely tragic. And the student wants to finish the semester, but she's struggling. And my suggestion was that she let this student watch Bending the Arc movie, the story of partners in health, Paul Farmer, anthropologist, Jim Kim, anthropologist, and Ophelia Dahl. Watch the movie and then have them reflect on their experiences having limited or no access to healthcare during this pandemic, which is part of the reason the student is struggling, and have them see the way in which this organization came together to find a way to provide healthcare, access to healthcare as a human right. And the course is on human rights. So let the student write about human rights and healthcare, access to healthcare, how that's, so that I'm just illustrating this, so that student doesn't just have fear, that student has tragedy in their lives. And so I think we have to take it case by case in a certain way. But for anthropologists, I think that, in this time of COVID where you can't do field work, I think we just have to think about being innovative. And unlike decades ago, there are more opportunities, again, at least in the US, where there is not only, okay to explore alternative ways of gathering information and disseminating it, as Light and Dark Times is an example of. More and more, it's becoming an expectation.
We do have a page in the book that has Paul Farmer on it. Let me just show you all. So Elise just mentioned Paul Farmer, and here he is, his character here. In times and situations of despair, Stevenson, so the Brian Stevenson, who we mentioned about on the page before, urges people to participate in making decisions, taking action, and finding solutions. And Paul Farmer says, shifting resources down the steep grade of inequality from where there are too many to where there are too few, even if it means going to uncomfortable places and doing uncomfortable things. And this is a hard bit to swallow. I didn't like drawing this bit, but it is also true that for many anthropologists, Stephen's injunction is not new or unfamiliar. Engaged anthropologists understand that detachment constitutes a form of action, and that to pretend otherwise is to ignore the fact that distance and distancing are not at all neutral, but have consequences. And it's the negative of what we were just talking about, in that, it is scary and fearful to go to uncomfortable places and do uncomfortable things. But then we're also faced with this truth that actually me being detached and choosing not to go to those places and not to engage is a form of action. That it's not that I'm just being passive. Like, being passive is a choice. It's a form of action, and we have to recognize that and the consequences of that. So.
Thank you. And anyone who wants to jump in the conversation, just do so. You can raise your hand, or you can write in the chat. It's not a conversation only between a few of us. It's in conversation among all of us. And really, we have gathered here a group of anthropologists at different, times of their careers and different times of their research, and every one of us is here and can contribute to this discussion. So really, I encourage you not to be afraid and to speak.
Maybe if I can say a word, yeah. It's I don't know how to raise hands. I mean, I can raise it like this, but
okay, I see it.
But I don't know the trick. Natalia knows. Okay, I mean, yeah, I am personally very much impressed. But let me say some hesitations or some pessimistic opinions about what you have said. Well, first, the thing of, let's say, you said that this is an American perspective, what you both represent, and I'm happy to hear this. Why I'm happy? Because you also mentioned that there is a global significance, or there are things of global significance, and we should go beyond ivory towers, etc. But yet, how do you think you could have avoid this ethnocentrism, let's put it this way, yeah, that this is a particular perspective, that you can go beyond your particular perspective, not ivory tower, yeah, but beyond your particular perspective. I'm saying this, yeah, I know, and I think about Noam Chomsky, who said, well, whatever America does is global because America is a global power. Among the authors that you have mentioned, you both mentioned at the very beginning, virtually all of them were, let's say, Western scholars, with exception, well, or Americans actually, with exception of Hannah Arendt and Václav Havel, cited in the introduction. So this is this kind of not hesitation, but that, well, whether you have some thoughts about how to go beyond the Western ivory tower of the problems, yeah. Because sometimes when I hear that, well, people, let's say middle class people in America or in Europe have this and that problems, and when I think about what problems do people have in Afghanistan today or in Sub-Saharan Africa, then it's really, really, it appears to me somehow disproportional, yeah, that it's just a thought. And yeah, and the effectiveness of this, or yeah, this is not this, I really like this distinction between optimism and hope, because sometimes when I look at what in small things that we try to do, and some of you are aware, of course, of there is a political situation in this country at this very moment, and people try to struggle with this or that, with, on the one hand, with poverty, with inactivity, with COVID, and then with authorities that systematically destroy social sciences and the humanities, anthropology, in a sense, in particular. And we mobilize other people around the world, and we fight, and this is in vain. Yeah, we can't succeed. So sometimes I feel like being in a tunnel, and there is always a light at the end of this tunnel, but sometimes this light is just a lantern on the wall, that we crash into this wall at the end of the tunnel because there is just this lamp, and it's not the end of the tunnel. Well, maybe it's a bit out of frame, but
okay. So thank you, Michal. I think that you raised some really important points, and I would say that I think that the perspective in this book, actually, starting with my address, I'll start with my address. That when I was, I had to stand there and figure out, what am I going to say to this audience of anthropologists who are members of the American Anthropological Association? 80% of the members are from the US and 20% are international, mostly from Western, whether North America, South America, or Europe. Very few members are elsewhere. So this is my audience, my original audience. And of course, the book is built on the address. The darkness of the world, as I hope I made clear in the beginning of this talk, is not about the darkness that, the troubles of, in the United States or in New York City, or limited to that. The troubles of the world that what we do say in the book, that we have to look at, the larger political economy and the infrastructures politically and economically globally for the sources of the suffering. And we have to understand, in my view, that's what we have to understand. And okay, so the problems, the human suffering is the human suffering in the world. The contributions that we celebrate in this book are this, in terms of the scholarship, is from scholars everywhere and anywhere, in the world. But my address, and then therefore, when I developed that address, I went to the literature that was my coming of age literature, which was, to be straightforward and honest about it, that is the literature I was exposed to, and that therefore influenced me, was the literature, of the West, for the most part, with maybe a few little exceptions here and there. So it is true that it's ethnocentric to the degree that this is my training and this is what I learned, and I dipped into that literature that I thought was particularly powerful because it helped me learn how to understand the world. And so I ended up, from Virginia Woolf, when I was a teenager, reading Virginia Woolf novels, to reading Vivian Gornick because she writes about writing, and I love what she writes about writing. To Eduardo Galeano, who is actually a Latin American journalist, whose book Upside Down is about the world and how upside down it is. And then the anthropologists, who I've been exposed to, as well as the philosophers, like Hannah Arendt and then Bertolt Brecht, who is also European. So I confess to that is, I didn't go to search, for this talk. I went to my influences, and that's what informed how I constructed the address and what I wanted to say to that audience at that time. So I don't know if that, justifies, or I think I'm hoping that it will explain where I'm coming from, and I'm very explicit about these my own limitations in terms of what I've been influenced by. But my understanding of human suffering is absolutely not limited to the Western world and its suffering. Quite the opposite. The impact of some of the worst infrastructures and the worst of radical evil, which Hannah Arendt defines as any system that turns human beings into superfluous, as redundant, and therefore dehumanized. And that's the system that we have to interrogate. And the system that, and who holds the power over that system.
Well, fair enough, of course. I'm also for understanding the system and who has the power, and to show them with the finger you are.
Yeah. And I do believe that if we work collectively over borders and boundaries, imagine the things that can be done. And to use ourselves and to allow ourselves to be used in ways that are to contribute where we can. So again, to go back to my own community, where I help is in reading literature, translating it, and presenting it to on issues in my local community in ways that can be used to make policies in the interest of human beings, not in the interest of the local power holders. It's mostly around policing that my activities here. But that's that's what I can do. I'm just one person, and these are the I don't know, expertise or experience, whatever you want to call it, that I can contribute. And I think we can all contribute in whatever ways. The other thing I wanted to mention when we were, this is not related to what Michal said, but when we were talking about hope and students afraid and fear, and one of the feedback, a theme in the feedback that Charlotte and I have received over time, since the book has been released, is that people, and many people are very down, these days, that they actually feel inspired. It's energizing by the time they get to the end of this light and dark times, which is, even though we're so much in the darkness, there is a sense of I don't know what it is, but that stream of light, and we arrive at a crescendo that has to do with mutual understanding and the possibilities, as you said, Natalia. People are really finding that invigorating, which is a very nice thing to know that is an outcome for some people of holding on to this little book. I'll stop because I see there are hands up.
Yes, so I'm just to tell, there are 2 hands up, and there's also a comment in the question comment section. So I will give the voice to Tomasz, and then Marcin, and then I will read Marta's comments, unless she will want to speak later. Okay, so Tomasz Rakowski.
Well, thank you so much for your talk, Alice and Charlotte, and for the book, for the whole idea, and to totally sympathize with the project, with the idea. But I've got one question. I mean that probably, and probably you also feel that that issue, that probably we could point at certain contradiction that is embedded in this way of experimenting with the medium. Namely, in this sort of story, the meanings seem to be somehow very explicit and very univocal. And light is light and dark is dark, and good is good and bad is bad. And we deal with this very, very univocal notions such as suffering, such as violence. And this is somehow, I would say, in a certain contradiction embedded, because the anthropological analysis is very often trying to understand the complexities and the nuances of how the situation and the violence and the suffering is created. Where is where is the reason, where is the source of that situation. And even if I follow the Paul Farmer's analysis that are really saying a lot about the complexities, and so how to combine? I mean, these two extremes. I would say that on the one hand we've got a certain medium or certain genre center narrative in which you try, as far as I understood, to say something explicitly and react to the situation. Whereas on the other hand, we've got this anthropological knowledge that is very often full of ambiguities, of paradoxes. Even if we take a look at the ethnographies of Afghanistan and how people dealt with the military conflicts over the past 5 or 6 decades, how it was related to their internal conflicts, alliances, networks of solidarities as well. I mean, this is the whole story, and it really creates a sort of in-depth complexity, and it is so how to combine these two extremes. I mean, in that work that you made and propose. I mean,
okay.
Yeah.
So again, another wonderful question, and I think what makes me so happy is that I think we were quite aware of those kinds of contradictions when you have a title like Light in Dark Times. What you said, it sounds so black and white, but actually the content isn't so black and white. It is, we are engaged, the storyline of this little book is that we are engaged in an encounter, a series of encounters to try to understand the complexity. Okay, and what we do there is, of course, it's a graphic book. It's not going to be a treatise. It's not going to be a 500-page, 300-page, discourse on the complexity, but it gives the reader, viewer, the suggestion that these are key issues that need to be explored and understood. And what we have found, at least what we've, from the limited feedback we've gotten from students, this is like our, 18th talk since last November. And we're talking to a lot of classes. Anytime somebody invites us to a class, we go to a class, is that it's stimulating the young people to learn more. And I'll give you one example just to illustrate that. It was actually it was before the book came out. It was when Charlotte was still in New York and we were still in process, and we presented to our students at my university. And one student said, I never heard of Hannah Arendt. Now I want to know more about her, what she wrote, and read her writings. And I practically pinched his cheeks in joy, because this is what we want, is to expose young people to the issues that need to be explored more fully. So it's not as if we have all the answers. We're not trying to say that, but that. And then what I said earlier in my talk, that this knowledge which captures the complexities, knowledge is part of the thread, meaning of the thread of light, and it's a necessary but insufficient condition for making, social change in the interest of social justice. So again, it's almost like it's suggestive, or it's offering. It elevates the graphic genre because it brings this stuff in, and yet, of course, it's not complete. It's incomplete. And so, but that's part of that's part of our message. Here's a taste, go take it and eat more. Mm-hmm. So I think that's, and I think that the works that are, I mean, we have in our field, in all the fields, spent so much time writing about these important issues and complexities to one another that it just sits there on the shelf. And we need to bring it out to more people. That's our goal. Our goal was not to explain everything in all its complexity, but to say, we're taking this off the shelf and curating it, if you will, or at least some of it, and presenting it to you in a way that is accessible. And then also the meanings, because you mentioned about the meanings of light and dark. This is where the artist comes in too, because there were my words, but then there were Charlotte's representation of those words. And that offers the reader viewer another layer of meaning. So it's not, and that's a richness that is a contribution, I think, of this. I don't know if you want to say something to that effect, Charlotte, and I'll stop.
Definitely. So it's good to, it's a really, really great question. Thank you for your question. I've been thinking about, as Lisa was speaking, deeply about like light and darkness, and actually thinking about this kind of polarization or the extremes that you talk about. How can we put together combine this extremes of light and darkness with this nuanced, the importance of nuance in academia and the importance of those gray areas to go and figure out, like, because there is so much contradictory research. How can we say one thing is one thing and one thing is, and when the whole point of research is to challenge one another and try and get to the bottom. But I think in this case with light and dark, it is easy to see it as black and white. But in the same way that when you turn a desk lamp on to see better, what you're not doing is turning the light on and therefore looking at the light. The light is giving you a means to investigate something further. And the same way if something is in dark, you walk into a dark room, you can't see anything, it's useless. Like you can't wander around in there and do anything. You have to have some light in it. And that was the symbols of light and dark. That was the way that we were using these symbolic pieces, because we took out some specifics that used to be in Elisa's speech, because we didn't want to be specific and prescriptive to the reader. We didn't want to say this is the way or this is not the way. We wanted this much more generalized focus of the outcome of Lisa's life's research, and so which is why the majority of the pictures are very based on kind of abstract ideas of what light is, what dark is, what the earth might look like. It's not ever supposed to be in a specific country, or we don't even a specific culture. We try to steer away from all of those things. So actually, as an artist, sometimes it was really difficult, because how do you draw these things without putting specific things in there? If someone's eating a meal, like, how are they eating it? Are they sitting on the floor? Are they outside of the table? Are they around a low table? Or are they at a high table at a bar? There's all these specifics that you can usually go to as an artist. And in this book, there was none of that. And so actually the concept of light and darkness really helps to enable to draw something that helps the viewer to further engage with the text. Yeah, there is one more question, and I don't know how long we've got, but I imagine it's not too long.
Thanks so much for your responses. And if I just make very, very brief question, and I just cannot stop myself from asking that. Are you familiar with the work of Stefan Temerson and Franciszka Temerson? There was a pair of Polish and Jewish artists, and he was basically author of books and of films, and he directed a lot of films, but she was an illustrator, and they worked together as a pair in London over the Second World War. And as far as I remember, their poetics and their way of combining text with illustration was also a sort of response given to the Nazi and fascist propaganda and this way of conveying meaning. So I found it that is something that resembles me a lot, their work.
No, I'm not familiar. I would look. I just texted you in the chat privately. Can you send us the references?
Absolutely, I'm doing this right now. I mean, I will put it in the chat box.
Yeah. So Helena, maybe we can hear from Marcin, because we have one more question, because of the time.
Yes, we have a question, and we have this question and a comment, which I will read.
Oh.
And then if anyone has any pressing also questions, issues, you can ask now. Also, meaning raise your hand and I will give you the voice, just so we gather at least these two questions, maybe some other voice, and then we give you the voice to have your final answers. And then we finish at least the official part, and we can, unofficially stay in this gossip. So there is a question from Marta Kinder, an anthropologist, sociologist, and a migration scholar. She's sorry she cannot switch on the mic because of the children running in the background. So she writes, as you see, thank you for your interesting presentation and discussion. I'm wondering, in terms of the data you showed as a proof of these dark times, is it really needed? I think that historical data could actually prove that we live in very good times compared to the past, which does not disqualify in any way, in my opinion, the need for such a book today. So this is Marta's question, and we have Martin, and if anyone else has a question, you can go after Martin, and then we give the floor for answers to Alice and Charlotte.
Well, to Marta, I will say that that's a debatable point about we live in good times compared to the past. Depends on what you're looking at. And I know that, there are some folks who assert that, and very popular, books. I'm trying to remember that guy's some Better Angels author. Anyway, but there have been a lot of people that refute the data, and of course you have to look, I mean, here's where some of Thomas's complexities come in. I think you can't say that then was better, then was worse than now, and now is worse than then, or whatever. I mean, I think we're focused here in this book, and the reason I gave those statistics in the beginning is because a journalist asked me, why are you saying there are dark times? And so I didn't want to spend a lot of time on it, but if you just look at those numbers, it just demonstrates that there's a lot of human suffering, more, less than before. To me, that's almost irrelevant. What's relevant is that there is preventable suffering. It doesn't have to be. Some things are preventable, other things are not. It takes political will to reorganize our world so that to minimize suffering, and that does not exist right now, and it could, regardless of certain things that may have improved, for some people. Right now, the world is still organized in such a way that people, due to structural forces, are too many people. The people are rendered superfluous. There's too much radical evil. The conditions are not set in such a way that humans can fulfill their potential, whatever that potential that may be, and which is the definition of structural violence. So let's have the opposite of structural violence. So I would say that, and I forgot what the other part of it. Oh yeah, I guess I answered it. That I think it's needed. I think it's needed to talk about it because some people don't think there are issues, and there are issues. And then, of course, what I said in the presentation was those are the numbers, but then there is the conditions and the contexts.
Okay, thank you. And now, Martin,
yes,
you have the floor.
Yeah, thank you. And as always, thank you for the lecture and the meeting, for all the persons involved. And I guess I don't have really a question. Actually, I really wanted to have some, deep analytical question or comment, but actually at some point I got too emotional. about what was said. So I want to take some points from what Helena said before, and Alice said before, and also Michał said before, because I think these are all valid points about the situation, like the predicament we are finding ourselves now here in Poland as well. Because you also mentioned this sort of adjustment, like the way you adjust to the situation of the students at your university, and I felt like I suddenly compared with my experience of my PhD studies happening right now, and I'm feeling like we really had we hadn't get at least on the level of like the doctoral school, which is also a new thing, right, which is also completely chaotic. So it's one thing that we are like completely chaotic, and as you probably know, there is no anthropology anymore as a like discipline in Poland. So also like I'm not really doing the PhD in my discipline, which is also weird. But on top of it, also like I couldn't see any valid response of the university as an institution to the situation we found ourselves in. So, and it was really not nice, really hard. And I'm thinking about like those factors, like you said, like the structure of violence, which which actually like it's. As I'm actually looking from this perspective of a person who like I did my master's research, which turned out to be quite dark ethnography in the end. So now I wanted to make like still in a very like harsh conditions, but the research about something which is going to be quite revolutionary and hope-giving. But then again, it's really hard to do such a research when your own situation is like not really uplifting. Yeah. So and when the institution you are also involved in is like really not helpful in a way in this project. You know, I'm still thinking about the fact that, you know, today we are meeting here, we are discussing really great ideas for how to write, how to represent our thoughts, how to communicate, how to be active, how to change the world. And, you know, yesterday I had 1.5 hours of lecture just about how to plan to write my articles in order to get some points for the, and you know, and this was just the first meeting for the like it's going to take half of the semester of those classes, but it's solely of this. And I really wonder how to practice hope and how to practice public and engaged anthropology when your own, like when in a way when in a way you are also experiencing forms of structural violence of, you know, different kinds of, obviously they are also different, you know, for they are also individual for different students and scholars, of course, but this like very, yeah, this I think this like the question, and maybe as like one more question, like just to open up, like maybe you have some ideas, and this like maybe a question for all of you, not only to Alice and Charlotte, like how we can actually practice some form of engagement and solidarity that are going to help us to, you know, move, like help each other out in the situation and actually, you know, move one step ahead than what, you know, find the possibilities to get out from this situation, and how to protect ourselves from the structural violence, how to protect ourselves from, from those influences.
So I'd like to just respond if I could a little bit. First of all, how do you pronounce your name? Is it Martin? You said Martin, or is it because you have a C in your name, so I don't know how to pronounce it.
Yeah, it's Marcin. It's Marcin in Polish, but you can easily go with Martin. It's fine.
No, Martin, but it's with a T there. Anyway, okay. So I wanted to say, Martin, that my heart is with you, first of all, that you have to experience what you're experiencing, which is this sort of the opposite of, a sense of community. Like you can't do your doctoral field work. You're in your country right now, there's been a dismantling of your discipline. It's so painful and so difficult. And in the United States, the academy is shrinking. I mean, we still have anthropology, although not every day, I'm exaggerating, but this past year, there have been announcements of anthropology departments closing up at different colleges and universities across the country. But before that, under COVID, that's like happening now, but prior to COVID, it's been, the academy as a whole has been chipped away. I mean, I just told you a little while ago that we have like 10 faculty, full-time faculty, and then the rest, about 40 adjuncts, part-time, precarious labor, contingent labor, people who are not making much of a living. And that illustrates the destruction of the academy. And that's what's been happening here as well, in the US as well as in other places. So you have my heart, and I'm sorry that you're going through that. I love your call for solidarity and how to help each other. And I think it, again, it's so hard. It's again hard to be prescriptive. Like how do you do that? I mean, some of us have to. I make up my own decisions about how I do that. So when somebody reaches out to me, I've received, for example, two different people have reached out to me about this book and how we did it, because they want to do one too, and they want to know how we did it. So I respond, and then I take the time to be with them. I don't know them, that's okay. And it's not a big deal. I'm not saying it's a great thing, but it's just one illustration of being, if you will, a generous colleague in the world. I'm going to give you another example of something in my own work that to me illustrates a little effort to cross borders and offer some solidarity. So one of my more recent edited volumes is called Gender in Georgia, and it's in the Republic of Georgia. And I was able to get a fellowship to go to the Republic of Georgia to work with a group of women at Tbilisi State University who wanted to establish a gender studies department, which they in post-Soviet period they wanted to establish. And they wanted an undergraduate, a master's, and a PhD program. And I went there, and my job and as a fellow was to work with them to help them, because I have good administrative, experience, let's put it that way. And what I did when I got there was say to them, what is it that you need from me? Like, what would you want from me? And one of the answers, or several people said, we need to publish. And so we ended up doing a book called Gender in Georgia, an edited volume with Georgian scholars from different disciplines, but on gender in Georgia. Bergon Books published it. And they were able to take that volume and go to their rector and say, here, we published with a major international publisher. And we are legitimate. And we have this publication. I mean, they have their own publication. They've done other work too. Obviously, that's not the only thing. But that was again a little contribution, because I could help do that, because I could help take their chapters and copy edit them and work with the publisher here in the States, et cetera, et cetera. And that to me is I did it for solidarity purposes. I didn't do it for credit, at that point in my career, I didn't need to do that, but I wanted to do that because that's what I wanted to do. is to find these ways of crossing borders and working in solidarity, use my experience, use my skills in the way that best suits you. And I think we can do that more and more as individual scholars. But of course, we need the institution. The institutions need to support scholars. And I'm chair until July 1st, and then I'm free of that job. And I cannot wait, because what have I done the past several years? I had a public university in New York fight the administration for crumbs. And it's exhausting. The institutions have to support faculty. And I you know, we all have to do our part, I guess, to try to make that happen and shift it a little tiny bit.
Thank you very much, Alice, for this very important response that we do need to fight the administration and fight the, you know, stupid bureaucracy, or fight the things which, you know, try to stop us as well.
Yes. Although I don't want our afternoon to end on that note. So hopefully we can end on a different note.
I would go and protest now. Like, I just wanted to give a positive example of solidarity. I think what happened in Poland in the autumn with the protests, it was a ray of hope in the dark times somehow. And also what happened was that we as anthropologists often met at the protests and during the protests. And the moment we had classes online, but where I met students, and some of them are present here, and very happy they are here. And also PhD students, Martin and my colleagues, we met at the protests. So, you know, everything gone online, but we do meet at protests. And if there's, you know, difficulties and situations of, you know, distress, and we do try to help each other. So in terms of, I think, communal support, it depends on the persons, but I think there is some kind of, you know, as an anthropological community, there is a support, and there is, of course, not enough maybe, but of course, on the side of institutions, we need to fight also for the, you know, for what we need, for what is needed, and what, you know, what we want from the institutions. You know, on the side that it's not only work that we also are human beings. We have our sufferings we go through, and, you know, different difficult stories. So, so I think that somehow there is a ray of hope. There is a community where we do try to encourage each other, and also try to fight for what we believe is important. But I also think there is a need for more action and for more engagement and working together. Especially that if we are left, as Martin says, if we are left alone with the bureaucracy, with the suffering, with the difficulties, with the system, that's actually we're alone. And if we're a group, a community, there is more we can do so. And also people present here have been fighting the system in different ways, and Michał, Buchowski, and Tomek, and Ivona, Natalia, we have been trying to fight the system, you know, the stupid points or the stupid, you know, decisions of stopping anthropology as a discipline, but still it is there. I would just like to underline, anthropology is there, you know, alive and kicking, and it will not stop until everything, you know, all the powers crumble. But on that note, I don't know if anyone has any last comments or issues you want to say. I hope you agree with me that we are alive and kicking. And on that note, I would like to thank our great guests, great authors and artists, anthropologists, Alice Waterston and Charlotte Corden. Thank you for being here with us. And thank you everyone for bearing with us for this longer discussion and conversation. And I would like to end the official part, like stop the recording, Anya, if you can.